Welcome back to the last video in this series on some of the basic concepts. In this video, we're going to expand a little bit on some of the things we discussed in the first two. We're going to look a little bit further at cultural ecology, but through the lens of someone who studies globalization, which is kind of the way that things get from one place to another in a way that makes us all want to be the same. Now, this is also in continuous struggle with another idea called localization or local diversity for you Rubenstein book readers. So what exactly is cultural globalization? Well, in the United States, our culture is that of Judeo-Christian morals and background and heritage, right? So a lot of things we do kind of falls in line with Christianity in some way. It also falls in line with the English language or other Indo-European languages like Spanish, for example, or French. We feel like we are very closely tied to people of Europe because of our similar culture. So globalization is essentially the idea behind or the effort for us all to be exactly the same at a global level. A dude named Thomas Friedman writes a book called The World is Flat, in which he discusses economic globalization, the way that we're all so interconnected that everything that we do here in the US of A affects someone over there in Asia or somewhere in the Middle East or somewhere in Europe. If our economy goes down, their economy goes down. But there's more than just economic globalization. The first one we're going to talk about in this video is cultural globalization. We feel like we're very closely in line with someone living, say, in Europe, for example, because we have a very similar history and cultural heritage. But what if you spoke a language that's not English or French or Spanish? What if you spoke a language that's maybe local to your tribe in Africa somewhere, and there's no written history? You haven't written anything down in your language. Are you ever going to be able to make it big in the world economy in the same way that someone of the West has? And so, in this sense, cultural globalization kind of refers to the idea that some people might be pulled to or might want to be more like maybe, say, the West or maybe even the United States due to their cultural impact in places in the world, all over the place. Economic globalization is kind of the same concept, except as it applies to the world economy. And so this is the reason why in some countries, like in European countries, in the United States and Australia, and basically all these super developed countries on earth that have the strongest economies and the highest GDP per capita, we make a huge impact on the world economy as a whole because, well, the richer you are, the more you're able to buy into big money-making services, things that aren't necessarily for life, but things that are necessary for stimulating a huge, for stimulating the economy in a huge way. And so in that way, economic globalization tends to take the shape of, well, the West. And so you look at cultural globalization taking the shape of largely the United States and Europe, and then economic globalization taking the shape of largely the United States and Europe. And so it's no mistake to think that, well, this is why some people in other parts of the world might say that globalization is actually another way of saying Americanization, or the idea that the Americans are trying to, or anyone basically of the West, but the United States as the largest of those Western economies is basically trying to make everyone like us. And so when we put McDonald's in India, we might change it up a little bit on the menu to make it so that they're not eating cows because cows are sacred to them, but we might also still be impacting them by sending them a message to be more like us. When we see people wearing jeans all over the earth, that was kind of an American thing. We're trying to tell people to be more like us. Culturally, there's a strong pull for others to be more like the West. And so sometimes that gives us a little bit of a negative image when it comes to how people will perceive us. In particular, if you're looking at some of these radical Muslims like ISIS, which I'm not saying that they have any kind of right over us, but when we look at people like that call us imperialists, that's kind of why, because of cultural imperialism, which isn't like a put a gun to your head and make you be like us, like imperialism might have used to have been, but more so making somebody want to be like us so badly that they feel like their old way, their culture, their heritage is just kind of a wasted effort. So the result of globalization is manifold. Yes, you have McDonald's and Walmart all over the place. You have other fast food places there are American in its originality. They're all over the world. You've got agriculture that it caters to feeding Americans. You got the largest dairy farm on earth, by the way, is about to be built in China for the sake of feeding the Russians. So it's not just the United States. Anyone who's basically in the world is pushing these cultural ideas on others, and it's kind of fueling globalization, the effort for everyone to kind of be more like the West in that regard. We also see globalization of religion, like Christianity, for example, the world's largest religion with the most amount of adherents. Islam is also another globalizing religion. The reason why these religions are globalizing, by the way, as we'll get to when we start talking more about culture, is that they're universalizing religions. they do actively seek converts and send people out there in the world in an effort to convert others to their cause. And so, but religion in and of itself is a big part of cultural globalization. The way that cities are built are a part of globalization as well, and among other things. Lastly, I kind of want to talk with you about the clustering, diffusion, or the clustering and the density of different things on Earth, and then how ideas diffuse, since we're talking about globalization. First of all, if something is clustered together, that means you got a lot of one single phenomenon. That can be types of people, that can be trees, that can be different types of bodies of water, for example, that are clustered kind of in one area. If you look at the United States population, for example, you will see that the majority of the population is clustered in the New England states, kind of in the northeast coast of the United States. And that's also the largest clustering of population in North America, pretty much. In a neighborhood, you might see that certain people cluster in certain areas. You might have more high-end houses in this part of the neighborhood and more low-end houses in the part where I live. Density refers to how much of something is going on in those clustered areas. And so when you think about arithmetic density and population, for example, you're thinking about the amount of people in an area. Bottom line, that's your density. Okay, so you would measure the density of a U.S. population by taking the amount of people in the population over the amount of square miles. And if you think about density in certain other ways, for example, not just arithmetic, but also you've got physiologic density, or where you have the amount of people per farmers. You've also got agricultural density, which is the amount of people per unit of agriculturally productive land. These are different ways that we use density to kind of measure human quality of life and whether or not we can take care of ourselves in a certain area. You also can learn a lot about an economy based on density, because if there's 2,000 people per every farmer, well, those countries are going to be having to import some stuff from other countries, right? Diffusion has a lot to do with globalization, because diffusion is talking about how things spread from one place to another. So Christianity could have diffused in a number of ways in the early Eastern Roman Empire because of the missionary Paul. But today when we think about diffusion, we think about mainly the spread of ideas, I would say. I mean, I might be wrong on that. But think about social networking, for example. You put something up on Facebook, it goes viral. Everybody sees it, right? This is an example of what we call contagious diffusion, when it doesn't pick favorites based on race, on color, on ethnicity, on religion, and on socioeconomic status. Everyone has equal chance of seeing something, like you have equal chance of getting a disease. Hierarchical diffusion, on the other hand, starts in people that are really important or places of importance and kind of diffuses out. So you might think about a fashion trend in New York City, might diffuse to other large cities and then to other smaller cities, and so on and so forth, until it gets out into the countryside, right? And you've also got stimulus diffusion, which is kind of the idea that an underlying principle might be taken and adopted by another group. Example of this, there's two examples I like to give. First of all, like if you think about hamburgers, McDonald's, the Big Mac, well, you've also got other fast food restaurants that kind of copy that mentality, like with the Whopper and Burger King, all right, and Whopper Crystals or whatever sells. You've also got the idea that another example of stimulus diffusion would be the graphical user interface with Apple computers, which Apple wasn't always kind of the junk. They were kind of bad early on, and so they were beat bad by IBM, who picked up the idea of GUI, graphical user interface, and that's the reason why today most of our computers use icons. It was an Apple product, but it became big, a cool idea with IBM. The other kind of diffusion that we haven't talked about yet, and we're going to end here on the video, is relocation diffusion. Relocation diffusion is different from expansion, which is all the other three types of diffusion I just talked about. Relocation only happens with the relocation of human beings. So if the Amish relocate, or if these early Protestants relocate from Europe to the Americas, well, now they have relocated, they have brought their culture with them. This is an example of relocation diffusion. More on this in class. I'll catch you guys later. If you liked the video and you want a little bit more on AP Human Geography throughout the course of your term in the class, feel free to click subscribe and listen to more about what I have to say about the subject. Thank you very much.